We're going to analyze some of the top statements from President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. My name is still Adriaan Basson, Editor-in-Chief of News24. I'm still joined by Qaanitah Hunter, our politics editor, and Carol Paton, our writer-at-large on Fin24. If I can just go through some of the highlights, colleagues, that I highlighted here in yellow on my computer. South Africa needs a new consensus. The state must create an environment in which the private sector can drive the economy. Carol, a massive focus tonight on the fact that it's business and the private sector that must create jobs. The president quoted a figure of, I think, 80% of all jobs are created by the private sector and not the state. That was met with some interesting reactions from parliamentarians. We also heard tonight that a macroeconomic framework is at the center of his plans. There's a new Electricity Regulations Act which opens up electricity provision and essentially, I think, does away with Eskom's monopoly, but we'll ask you to analyze that for us almost soon. New Transnet spaces for the private sector to conduct their own freight rail lines from Durban to Johannesburg. The ICASA Spectrum auction in 3 weeks from now, a water agency in which the private sector will be involved. A cannabis and hemp planned for specifically the Eastern Cape and KZN, and the president looked very excited about this and mentioned the high levels of productivity that can come from that. And then I thought a very interesting appointment of Sipho Nkosi, the former mining executive, CEO of Exara Resources, to head up the red tape team in the presidency, Carol, to cut red tape for business. Some announcements as well made about job creations under something called the Social Employment Fund, the extension of the 350 Rand Social Relief Fund for another year, and we earlier spoke to Carol about how that may just morph into a basic income grant, although those words were not used in the speech tonight, I thought very carefully by the president. And that was the economic State of the Nation address. Carol, were you surprised?
I was surprised in that he went into such detail. That was surprising for me. Look, the thing is that we do get stuck in thinking that, everything is bad and the economy is not growing and nothing is happening. And it does make an impact when the president comes out and says, well, look, actually, it's, he named a lot of areas in which there was going to be change: water, electricity, ports, rail, broadband. All of those 5 areas, I mean, we've been talking about them for years and years and years, that those 5 areas is what's blocking up economic growth. It's what's stopping economic growth. It's a real drag on productivity. So we know these things, but I think he took, I think all of them, he took a little bit further. Each one went a little bit further. And yes, a lot of them could have happened sooner, if we want to be critical. Lots of these things should have happened, 3 years ago. But here we are, they're happening now. The Electricity Regulation Act, that's significant because it opens the way for private players to start selling between one another. So you might not have to necessarily buy your electricity from Eskom all the time. You might be able to buy it from the farmer next door who's got some excess or whatever. But obviously to do that, you need to use Eskom's transmission grid. So that's the other part of that act, is to say, of that proposed reform, is to say, let's have a really independent transmission operator, grid operator, which regulates this. And so there's a level playing field. Everybody can sell on equal terms.
Is it fair to call this a business-friendly SONA address?
Yeah, no, it's very business-friendly. I think it was great. I mean, when he said it's business that creates job, not government. As obvious that is to many people, it's definitely not obvious in a party like the ANC, where the belief is that it's the state that leads development. And what we've seen the ANC talking about this developmental state for years and years and years, and what we've actually seen is a really weak state that can't lead, it can't deliver basic things, never mind lead growth. So that's important, and as you say, there was a bit of rumblings when he said that. It was difficult to know who was rumbling.
If it was the EFF or the ANC or
yeah,
both.
exactly. We didn't really quite know who was rumbling, but very important point to be made, and I hope it gets made more often.
Carol, before I move to you, Qaanitah, this red tape team headed by Sipho Nkosi, that sounds. Do you think that's important and could be impactful?
It's so important. You know, I mean, the Western Cape government has had a really successful red tape cutting project where they actually go out and get stuff that's stuck in the port and get it out of the port because there's some silly red tape stopping it. So very important. But you know, we have been, I know the first time this was mentioned, this red tape thing was mentioned was when Thabo Mbeki was president. So we have, you know, it's been like, yes, we need to cut red tape, but we never have. And then at the same time, you have got a ruling party which loves red tape. You know, they love more red tape. That's actually what they never want to just achieve one thing with a project. They always want to pile on some other objectives, and that all adds red tape. So Sipho Nkosi, yeah, great choice, you know, fantastic. It's great that the president is drawing on these really accomplished business people, and hopefully he'll make a difference.
Can I just get in there, Carol? There seems to be the centralization in the presidency, where the president is really beefing up people who work at the union buildings, and he's attracting, you know, strong minds from his party and from the private sector, which is not something that we were used to see before. You had Kgosientsho Ramaphosa in the infrastructure, you know, to head up infrastructure. You have and there's almost sort of a focus on bringing everything into the presidency so he can sort of keep an eye on it. I'm just wondering the perils of this, because at the end of the day, you can appoint Sipho Nkosi, or you can appoint Daniel Minile, people who come from really, really rich backgrounds in the private sector and other spaces, but then they still have to work with the government departments who actually don't care. And so for me, it's sort of, you know, it's well intended, but at the end of the day, how does an appointment of one person translate into turning a culture of, like you said, where you have this institutionalized red tape, where red tape, you know, justifies job creation in those spaces, and patronage networks in other spaces. Yeah. And so that's why I wonder, what, you know, I understand that the noble intention of bringing in these skills to government, and then the other thing is you're creating almost parallel government departments in your presidency, almost duplicating work in the form of task teams and in the form of you know, these experts that come in. So at the end of the day, yes, it's great appointments, but how much of it actually translates to outcomes? Maybe
the professionalization of the civil service starts in the presidency, and the president hopes it filters from it.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit of an admission that, well, government isn't working. So let's bring in, because, you know, the Department of Trade and Industry should be championing the fact that there's too much red tape. They don't. They add to it all the time. So yeah, it is a substitute for a government that works, but our government isn't working at the moment.
Qaanitah, I want to ask you politically, in the ANC tonight, how will this speech be perceived? Very business friendly, very much we must do as government, all we must do is to make sure that business can thrive, because they're going to create the jobs. Yes, we're going to add a few thousand here with a water project and a rail project, but the big stuff's going to happen in private sector. And how do you interpret this term, the new consensus? Because the president obviously thought long about what he's going to call. I think you called it earlier. You said it's going to be something of a pact or something tonight. So it's called now the new consensus. Yeah. So who must consent to what? You know, consensus implies, I guess, that not everyone really agrees, but we consent on this thing. You know? Yeah.
So I think it's this vision of like we need to have a new path for South Africa, and you need to bring government, and you need to bring labor, civil society in the next 100 days, come together, put together this plan of what we all agree should be the future of South Africa. Now, South Africa is not short of plans. We had a very wonderful national development plan. We have had many of Ramaphosa's iterations of it, and I understand his motivation of getting everyone on board so that you can all work towards moving the country in the same direction. It's important. I'm not in any way cynical about that, but I do think that, as Carol said offline, is that when government has to practically lead the way, and so we've not seen that. So you can have a social compact in paper, but what happens in terms of government actually showing up to the party? And that's why it was very important what he was saying about jobs. For the longest time, there was this thing that we can make business unfriendly decisions. We can mess over the economy, if you like, and then we will promise these jobs within government and these EPW. What is it? These temporary municipal jobs and lord the outcomes of that. But now there's a real realization that the state cannot deal with this massive unemployment issue. And so if you ask me, people in the ANC, I mean, this is a business-friendly speech, and you're going to hear mumblings. If you want to talk about ANC factionism, I know that this speech is going to evoke the whole rumblings of appeasing neoliberal capital and that kind of thing. And you already see that kind of narrative that is persisting. The reality of it is that he had no way out of it. Again, like Carol said, he went a bit further this time. He went very specific into detail, and I think that it was important, even though many of the points that he made may have gone over the ordinary viewer's head in relation to the trains, in relation to the ports. But I think that it was very detailed to show that he has a comprehensive plan, multifaceted as well, and also to show that there has been some groundwork done, and we're building on this groundwork. And I think that this is not to say that completely a job well done, but it's also to appreciate that he was coming from an environment where the basics, the bare minimum, was not done, and so that's why he had to talk about spectrum and
he put dates on it this time,
and
I
he
must
has put
say,
dates on
because
it.
a lot of it is things we've heard before, let's be honest, but I mean, spectrum in 3 weeks, we'll hold him to that. The trains opening up of transit in April this year. Carol Paton, I want to come back to you on the basic income grant. Are you surprised that we didn't hear a more firm commitment to that tonight and just an extension of the 350 rand?
No, not at all. Not at all surprised. And actually, I think that the president really put it well, so there are these fears, especially in the markets, that he's going to be under pressure to commit, and he's going to commit to something the country can't really afford, and it's going to land us in trouble further down the line. And he didn't do that, but he did say, we do want to be a society that doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think most people, many people in South Africa would agree that that's the kind of country we do want to be. But I wasn't surprised, and I think the fact that he gave it a 12-month extension is significant, because sort of in the inner kind of inner circle discussions and in the discussions that are going on in government, the aim is to have some sort of indication by October, medium-term budget statement, to say like, yeah, we're doing this, here we aren't, and this is how we think we've got to fund it, and only to introduce it in April 2023, if it's going to be introduced. So that wasn't surprising, but it does show that he's trying to signal, we're going to be careful, we're going to do this properly, we understand our situation, and he also, we know he's partial to public employment programs, so he threw some of those in as well, which I think is good, and the youth tax incentive as well. Those are the sorts of things you actually really do need on a big scale to help business create jobs, because that's what helped business grow.
Qaanitah, just moving away from the economy for a moment, criminal justice system, corruption. We heard the president say that he will report by June latest on the Zondo report, with a clear plan of action in response to the Commission's recommendation. So again, committing himself to a date. He's
made that date before. He said it when the report was released, that he's not going to make any commitment before this. Obviously, people were quite annoyed by that, because you have to report, say something. But what he was saying about whistleblowers, he kind of put his neck out in relation to that, saying that there's going to be this review of legislation and a comparative study to other jurisdictions to strengthen whistleblower protection. And and also calling on law enforcement to say they must immediately deal with this issue. We obviously know that the SONA Commission report flagged this to say the people who have come forward and blew the whistle on state capture are suffering the consequences of it, and that's absolutely horrendous for a country, especially now as we're trying to undo the effects of state capture.
That may come as a bit of cold comfort for the likes of Athol Williams, who had to move himself out of the country.
Absolutely. But then there's obviously the finger pointing at the National Prosecuting Authority, AB, in terms of what are they going to do, because a lot of that report is points to them. The president showing a lot of confidence in the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi. He's also committed himself to appointing a new head of the Investigative Directorate. He didn't give a time frame for that.
And he didn't say why him and Grenade left.
We would love to hold him to a date, especially because that's such a crucial entity that needs to have a new head. And then also talking about the State Capture Commission in relation to acknowledging that yes, there was state capture. And I know that sounds bizarre to many of us who've been writing about this for a long time, but there are circles within the ANC that had this level of this kind of cynicism towards the concept of state capture, as if did it actually happen, and the people like Jacob Zuma and his supporters that would deny that state capture actually happened. So for the president to say that gives you a good indication that we all now on the same terms. It's now official. There was state capture. Rogue elements, corrupt elements, criminals infiltrated the state and benefited from it, and so now there must be the consequence part that comes afterwards.
Just two more important things that caught my eye that I made notes here was the leadership changes.
Yes,
he emphasized the plural changes in security agencies. So we spoke earlier today about the sword hanging over the head of Kekla Sitoli at the police. We spoke about the acting appointments at the SSA, so hopefully those and others are some of those that he referred to, and see some of those positions again. Again, something he could have done earlier. And then Qaanitah, your immediate field of expertise, he took responsibility for the July riots, if I heard him correctly. He said the report, the Sandy Africa report, portion blame in the executive, and we accept that.
Yeah. So this is something President Ramaphosa is very good at, right? He will tell you the house is burning, and he'll say, yes, we may have had a role to play. The reality of it is that how do you take responsibility for it? And I think the changes in the top echelons of the security cluster is very important. He needs to appoint a Director General of Intelligence. He needs to appoint the head of domestic intelligence. That's very important. He needs to stabilize crime intelligence. The back and forth in relation to, these are quick appointments that can be made. These are not lengthy processes. Then he needs to make a decision, like we said earlier, around Kekla Sitoli. These are big things the president directly can just, put his signature on, instruct the minister to institute a process and appoint these people. And the thing about the July unrest is that he regurgitated what the report said, which was important. But I do think that he needs to take ownership of it, and he needs to now say, because when he released the report, he said, we're going to announce real action. And so just saying, okay, we're now going to just sort of make some changes, I don't think it's significant, but I do think coming from where we're coming from, where there was no acknowledgement around the role of government and cabinet at the center of this devastating unrest that was unprecedented in our democratic dispensation, I think that it was a very good first step. It can't be the only step.
But we need those arrests and prosecutions. Carol Paton, Qaanitah Hunter, thank you very, very much for joining me tonight. We are going to deepen ourselves into the speech now. By the way, for our readers' benefits, we did not receive the full speech until right at the end. So we're going to sit and read it again now with a red pen and provide some more analysis and insights on News24 tonight and tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night. Goodbye.